You can drink water.
Yeah, and water. Well, coffee.
Oh, I didn't do that today. I should have done it.
Yes, yes. I'm sorry.
Gives you more energy. No,
You
in
have my
fact,
condolences.
well, what I took was CBD oil.
Oh,
Calms me down.
I need to try that.
Yeah, it does work, but it's very subtle.
Okay,
Oh,
we are now live, ladies. Welcome.
Hi everyone. Um, my name is Enoe Aracely Brown, and I am your host today. And we have Tashel Border, who I will be introducing. But first, I want to start by introducing a little bit about the Open Center. And we're live here on Facebook, which is a new, I think, event that we've added in the last few weeks. And we actually are very excited about it. So, the Open Center is, just to remember, it's a nonprofit organization. We've been around for about 35 years here in New York City. And it is really considered one of the largest urban centers in the country. Um, Basically, we have lectures, workshops, concerts, professional trainings, and my best love is, of course, when we do the international conferences every year. And this year we were supposed to be going to Portugal, but of course, we postponed that, but we are still having the conference. And please be aware of that. It's really a global conference in September of 2020. So look us up at opencenter.org to find out information. And actually, it has its own website, which is called esotericquest.com. So maybe you can start preparing for next year's trip when we go to Portugal. Those trips are fantastic. Now, I want to introduce another branch of the Open Center, which is called the Art of Dying Institute, which is where we have Tashel Border is really currently under, if you want to put it that way. And basically, that particular branch was designed and begun because they wanted to bring a new generation of thought leaders whose goal is to bring new solutions to the area of death and dying, and to really understand how to move society from the practice of denying death to one where you're actually providing integrative, holistic, spirituality, diversity, culturally supportive. It just informs the approach to death from a sacred point of view. And that's really, I think, unique, and one of the few organizations that really is doing that well in the United States. What I like about this area is that it includes spirituality. It's not just palliative care. And I think it has a great future. Now, I want to say a little bit about Tashel Border, who is a PhD, and she is the assistant professor at Department of Human Development and Family Science at the University of Missouri. She is a Forward Promise Fellow and a certified thanatologist. And Dr. Border publishes works relating to diversity and resilience through loss, and she has co-edited a book called The Handbook of Social Justice in Loss and Grief. Her recent areas of research include African American youth grief and adjustment to loss, which could be anything to do with homicides, race-based trauma. And she has developed this really spectacular program, which is at Missouri University, called SHED, which provides tools to address grief and loss. So just to note that Tashel is in great demand right now, and we programmed this particular class that's coming up soon in the fall. So we are lucky to get her, because I don't think I could get her right now. Everybody wants her. So Tashel, welcome. Welcome to
yes,
the Open Center. If anybody could applaud, that'd be great.
yes. Thank you.
Yeah, well, one of the things I want to start with was, how did you come to get into this type of work? What inspired you or sparked this interest? This is a very particular interest.
Yeah, it is. And also, I want to thank you for the introduction and for having me, and for all of the work that you do at the Open Center. It is definitely an innovative program that is having a huge impact. So for me, I got into this area just by being I think I've always just been interested in loss. As a teen, I would read obituaries,
Oh,
which was very odd. My
your
siblings,
parents love that, I'm sure.
yeah, my siblings would say, well, don't hand her the living section. She needs the, so I was just intrigued actually by the number of violent deaths in New Orleans where I grew up, and how people were dealing with them, and also how people were denying them. Speaking of death denial, right? Living with tremendous amounts of loss and pain, but still managing every day, right? Going back to work and functioning. So I was curious about how people deal with more traumatic losses, and so we tend to study who we are, if you think about it, for many people, right? And the things that drive us. And so I was really interested in particular interested in this with Black populations in particular, because the population that I lived in was largely African American, if that makes sense. So
no, that's very
my
important.
reference point.
So basically, one of the things in the Latin American community is that they call it, when somebody goes through trauma, there's a great deal of what they call soul loss. A portion of the soul is lost. And when you envision the African American community in the United States, in my mind, I see that as soul loss that has gone on for decades as a group.
I apologize. Real life, real time. Sneeze. Right. Okay.
So I'm assuming, and what they do in the Latin American community is that they have several ways of like soul journeying and other kinds of healing techniques to, as they say, repair the soul to come back to itself. Because yes, so I wanted to ask about that, and how you're working with the same idea, I would say.
Yes, I am. So one part of this is funerals, there are so many different things that allow people to heal, right? And so when I initially undertook this program of study and working with populations, I was really intrigued with funerals. That's the next thing that might be interesting for a younger person. I was really intrigued as a healing mechanism, right? I was really intrigued with, I'd known a person who died by violence, and so I didn't know what to expect, right? He was injured, he was shot in the head, right? A lot of violent deaths are not, right? They're dramatic, they're graphic. And I was intrigued by the way the funeral director, in terms of healing, was able to give him a normal appearance, right? They were able to give him an appearance for his family, and design a service that would be that would help this family be able to see their family member intact, right, after such a terrible traumatic loss, and the role that played in healing, the words that the pastors or the ministers speak at these funerals, and the roles that they played, the music, and all of the different types of symbolism that we see, and how that plays a role in healing. And then one other thing regarding spirituality, not to get too deep into this, but I did a lot of ethnographic work. So I attended random funerals, right? I participated in the unique rituals of New Orleans that date back to, African culture, of musical funeral processions that seem weird to some people, but they're very normal, right? And very connected to funeral processions during slavery, actually, in fact. So I was really interested in those type of rituals, why they exist, how people make meaning of them, and how they help with healing, and the role that spirituality plays in that as well.
Wow. I mean, do they also have roots in the African continent, or was a lot of this based on the ceremonies that started to develop in the South through slavery?
A combination, really. Thank you for asking that. So a lot of these rituals were actually designed prior to slavery, through colonization processes and heavy Western influence. People who were enslaved still held on to African cultural rituals, and they combined some of the rituals that go along with Christianity, right? And so we see a melting pot. In New Orleans, for example, we see a combination of people from France and Spain. And so we have all of that together, right? Blended into the rituals that we especially see in that particular southern city.
So they've been affected by other religions, of course.
Yes. Christianity, Catholicism is really huge in New Orleans. It's huge. It was huge in many of the places where, Barbados, the Caribbean, places like that. And so we see even voodoo tied into these rituals.
Correct. I mean, I know a little bit, but
yes.
So the traditional ceremonies have changed because of the influences, but they still work.
Yes, and they've changed some. And I will say what I appreciate about many underrepresented cultures is the ability to, in the face of disenfranchisement, in the face of, imagine people who were like in chains and not fed, and like, and still to be able to come out of that and say, you know what, even if I was, shamed in this life, and if I was not able to have, access to things were taken from me, whatever the case is, we're going to still find a way to celebrate a person when they die. Like, you still matter, even if we have to make you matter and show the world how much you matter when you died. And so that I will say that also is what really intrigues me. If I might mention this, as we get into rituals, I think it's so central to, particularly in light of events that are more visible right now. We're going through a COVID, we're going through this huge pandemic. I think it's especially important. So this presentation on African American rituals both goes, it goes along with the tradition at the Open Center in terms of getting really hands-on experience with rituals. But I think what people will see when they participate in the workshop or that I do is provide some context, spend a little bit of time on context, so that I want people to leave with a really good understanding of why people are responding the way that they are right now with COVID, right? A general understanding of that, a little bit of understanding about, we can't ignore the elephant in the room.
Right.
And I think as a group, I will say I'm so hopeful about the number of people who are really wanting to see positive change and community and alliance building. We see a lot of different people from a lot of different groups working together, probably now more than
ever.
I won't say ever in history, because I haven't been around forever, and some people might disagree with me. So I'm going to focus on this segment of my life and say that in my time and looking at issues related to diversity and inclusion, and even beyond inclusion, just ally formation, of just people working together, using whatever strengths we have, whether we ask for them or not, to see how we might work together. And so I want to spend, I do plan on spending just a little bit of time of just providing a little bit of context in a way that feels safe. I'm a compassion-based person, just like the Open Center operates from, and a little bit of time kind of talking a little bit about the pandemic, the differences in how this impacts the way we're able to even do our rituals, everybody. And then for African American populations, because these rituals serve such a huge function, because we're less likely to go to therapy, right? And so these funeral rituals and the church service on Sunday morning and on Wednesday, those are places for catharsis for a lot of Black population, for a lot of people, but especially Black populations, in terms of support that they need to go back to work and face the world the next day. So we'll talk a little bit about meaning making around these deaths. We had George Floyd as one of his death has been highly publicized. There's no way we would talk, and honestly, in terms of integrity, and I hope the same for this audience who's listening. A lot of people are wanting to help and understand. Fortunately, I can take us on a journey to understand that process that leads us into the rituals, and the rituals make sense, and they might not be rituals that everybody partakes in. I also understand rituals that Natives utilize, but it's not my background in terms of what my family does, but I still value it. And I think it's extremely important. And it also helps me see commonalities between those rituals and my own, and to better understand differences, and that those differences still matter and count. Right. And yeah.
Well, I wanted to understand a little bit more, because you have certain terms that you use, and you talk about disenfranchised grief and suffocated grief. Could you speak a little bit more about that? Why is that important for, let's say, the general population to really come to understand and know? Because that seems like a pinnacle piece to understanding the African-American community, Black families, and how they go through life.
Yeah, thank you for giving me that opportunity again. And I want to, this takes me back to my beginnings again. And that is that part of the reason that I was curious about this and have been for years, and why I study it is, and do this type of programming, is because oftentimes people's loss experiences in general, if there's anybody listening right now and you've had a loss, then you know that you went back to work or to school or to wherever, and somebody didn't take a minute to just say, I'm so sorry you had about the death of your dad or your dog or whomever it was, right? And so we see that happening to a great extent with disenfranchised grief. I will say is the notion that some people's losses get even less recognition than others based on who we value in this society, right? So if your life didn't matter that much, then your death for some people doesn't matter that much either, right? And that's a big part of what we're seeing right now is with the protests. People are saying that this life mattered. A lot of this is unconscious. So again, we'll talk more about this. We only have a small segment here, so hopefully this makes you want to get on in there and take advantage of it while you can.
Yes.
But in disenfranchised grief is the notion that, some losses just don't count as much. And one quick example for the group, people who are actively listening and being here today, thank you for being here again, is, friendship deaths don't count as much, for example, just in the general public. If you had a friend who died, and maybe this was like your sister, and you should have really been in obituary as the sister, or you should have been sitting with the family, but you're sitting in the back. So sometimes people unconsciously just don't say this. People might focus more on the family than you as the friend, and maybe you were as close to the person as the family was. Maybe they didn't even talk to their family. Right. So disenfranchised grief is this notion that in our society, there are sometimes these unwritten rules about whose grief should count and matter and be supported. Suffocated grief. And by the way, if this happened to you, your grief matters. We're right here acknowledging it right now. And we're sorry you had that experience. Suffocated grief as kind of goes beyond that, right? So it's one thing for suffocated grief is where not only did people not recognize your loss, but you may have been penalized on top of that, right? And so basically I try to distinguish them as the difference between just having a prejudice and then acting on that prejudice by treating a person differently by
you're being punished, for example, because
punishing a person. So for example, in a lot of my work with teenagers who were dealing with losses, they would go back to class. The teachers, wonderful teachers, by the way, I don't want to know, teachers are underpaid and deserve much more support, but oftentimes they're not trained about how to recognize loss in kids. And so a kid would return to school, their loss wouldn't be recognized, even if they had on a t-shirt with the person's face on it. And then if the child was sleepy at school or showing normal grief reactions, maybe angry, a lot of kids, for example, are going to come back to school in the fall, upset about what's going on. If things have not shifted, right? There are kids and teenagers and families out there protesting. When I go back to work as an African-American person, I'm experiencing that day differently than some of my colleagues, for example. And I would hate to get punished because it's going to take me another 30 minutes or another day to finish something because I'm completely stressed about what I'm watching because this could be my child. You got me? So I wouldn't want to be penalized and unrecognized for my distraction. So these kids would be punished and sent like to a safe seat, right? For their normal grief reactions, compared to other schools where kids might have therapists come in to support them. So suffocated grief is where you get punished. A little bit of that we're seeing just really quickly with the protests, where people are protesting peacefully in some places and are being not sprayed, I'm thinking about 1960s, but are being tear gassed. And you see people acknowledging that that's happening. It's not everybody. And so again, this isn't one group against another. Again, we're about how do we figure this out together and work together. But when people that's another form of suffocated grief, to punish quiet protesters who are simply saying, expressing their grievance. And when they get tear gassed by simply walking down the street, that's a form of suffocated grief.
Ah, really? That's a lot.
Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to know was how has this work really, how have you seen it work in settings of, like, say, caregivers or people who work with the dying? Have they applied some of this information?
Oh, absolutely. So I've worked with hospices. I've worked with I'm going to be working with death doulas coming up here. I'm excited about that relationship through the Open Center. A wonderful place to connect. Again, a lot of incredible people who are offering workshops and being instructors there. So check those out. But yes, I've worked with a lot of different organizations who, from schools to hospice to palliative care, to help in hospital settings as well, to help them be able to, for example, make sure that they're reaching underrepresented populations. You know, again, Black populations have a little bit less trust in these institutions because of a lot of differential treatment that happens, if we're being honest. And so I do a lot with how to help reach African American populations, how to help them better understand what the services are and build trust so that they can benefit from these incredible services of death doulas and the hospice and palliative care, right? So that they are recognizing the grief of these people in ways that make sense for them.
Someone is asking us online here, can you explain more about the notion of catharsis?
Yes, absolutely. So catharsis is just this, and please feel free to ask if I'm not responding exactly in the way that you're seeking a response for. But catharsis is a form of expressing how you're feeling. So catharsis might be yelling into a pillow, as I do with my 3-year-old, or quiet screams like. So many different forms of expression. Again, protest, that's a form of catharsis, being able to have some space to express your grief or whatever it is you're dealing with at a time.
And how does that work with the Afro-American community in the sense of how do they express that? Because my understanding on reading some of your work was that when a person of color sometimes expresses how they feel, it's seen as over the top.
Yes. Oh, yes. And we've all heard of, well, I don't know if you have heard of the angry Black woman.
Yeah.
Or all of these types of things. And here's the deal, you all. If we get together further, you will see, I hope that you see I show up as I am. And we do talk about some of these things that may not feel safe talking about outside of this space so that we can make sense of them. And another form of ally formation, again, is just being able to sometimes stop saying things we've been saying, be more aware of our phrases. For example, instead of, because I study a lot, do a lot of work with homicide laws, I encourage people not to use bullets when they send me anything, but to use love dots. See how different that is, right? So we're not promoting violence. So there's so many ways, tiny and large, that I think will produce a lot of aha moments and really, you will, the goal is that you will unlearn as much as you learn in our time together. Wow. And so catharsis, so a lot of unlearning. So catharsis, again, if you live in a culture where people don't necessarily see you as human, consciously or unconsciously, right? To put your knee into a person's neck and just let them die, whoever it was, I don't care what the racial background was, is to really see something that's not human, right? And it doesn't matter what the profession is, quite frankly. You have to be able to separate yourself from humanity to do something like that.
Yeah, there's no compassion.
Yes, and so yeah, it ties into compassion and all of those types of things. And so, getting back to what you mentioned is that it's oppression is kind of being damn if you do and damn if you don't. I hope that word is okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
So simply speaking up. I mean, look at me now. I've been accused of being an angry Black woman. I mean, look, come on.
You don't come across that way to me.
I mean, and that's just simply for maybe expressing disagreement and this is kind of my height. You'll see me get excited, but this is about it for me. But really it's stereotyping, right? So when people try to express basic notions, it can be viewed as threatening to people who are already stereotyping you, right? If you're viewed as like not human, then anything you do will be viewed as aggressive. One other thing I want to highlight, for example, Black males are rarely are thought of as much older than they are. The same with Black females, right? And so very early in life, they get less police protection, less teacher protection, sometimes less parental protection because they are the research, we know that an 8 to 10-year-old Black male is viewed as like 16 by majority populations, not by Black populations. So then that again impacts the way you interact with them. So again, a lot of unlearning, because we can unlearn that and we can see people as human. And then rituals make more sense. And then when you look at all of the expenses that go into a Black funeral, and you say, wow, that family didn't have a lot of money, but they like spared no expense on this funeral. Yes, because that home going to a better place, which is conceived of as heaven or wherever that person is going, right, is going to feel safer and better than people have felt here on earth. And that's a kind of a sad concept, that you have to get what you need after you leave here, because you couldn't get it here without being stereotyped or, so rituals are that much more important. And again, we'll delve much more into those in our time together.
All right. I do have this other question. Is there one healing tradition or technique that you would like students to walk away from mastering? What would that be? Can you give us a sample of what that would look like?
Here's what okay, so I'll say this. I'll give a little bit away. And that is, again, if you first, this would be my first goal, is that you walk away understanding context, right? Because we can do like a million rituals, but if we show up in spaces where populations are, and we just try to start the ritual without an understanding of how every step of that ritual has a certain meaning, how the past is eulogy, right? Imagine being the person who had to do the eulogy for Breonna Taylor's funeral and George Floyd's funeral. Like, how do you help console a family?
That's good.
Yeah. Now, I want you to understand this too, and we'll talk about the rituals, but imagine that in Black populations, and you've seen this with COVID as you've been watching the news. And again, as we watch these things, the goal is not to blame ourselves, but to say, how can I be a part of the solution? And the rituals are. But I want you to leave this workshop understanding things better in terms of when you watch the news. So then you're constantly making that connection between human experience and ritual, human experience and ritual. I want you to be vacillating between the two constantly. So as you've been, just really quickly, as it ties into the rituals, as you've been seeing things with COVID, if you've been watching the news, or even on social media, you've seen that the disparities and the death disparities are profound, right? You probably can fill in the blank right now. The people who have mostly died from from COVID have been dealing with pre-existing
conditions
in the healthcare system, right? These disparities already existed. So they've died. My own brother was impacted by COVID, okay? And on a ventilator, he survived, but another person who had pre-existing health conditions. So I want you to understand that people have dealt with all of these losses with COVID. Then we see the disparities in the deaths, in the shootings, police shootings, and then also in Black communities, right? So Black communities are always dealing simultaneously with large numbers of death due to health issues, and then large numbers of death due to violence, and then everything in between, old age and things like that, right? So these rituals, again, mean that much more, because these are disenfranchising deaths when you die by violence. That's just, they're complex, right? And the same with COVID, right? People who died by COVID, or whoever you were, you couldn't have the funeral that you needed, right? You could have two people there at a time. And to imagine Black funerals having large numbers of people, and that's why I need large numbers of you to show up if we're going to do this the right way.
Right.
A sign of respect for Black communities is how many people show up at that funeral. Wow. So you see children there. Children need to be there. You'll see toddlers being passed around. Right? So it's a sign of respect, again, in a culture in which you've lived your life dealing with being called the angry Black woman in a meeting, having your ideas taken, just a whole list of things that we have to be honest about if we're going to talk.
Right.
We're still surviving, right? Black, I'm still doing this talk right now, right? So we survive because of these rituals, because I get to do these death rituals or go to church and my spirituality is intact, right? So many strengths. And my goal is that you'll figure out what the strengths are in the context of the challenges and how these rituals are so key. And celebration and homegoing are huge aspects of them. So we are going to do some kind of homegoing and I call myself sometimes, or I've been called the Cajun death, voodoo priestess, because the rituals that we do are actually quite celebratory, but they're also there'll be a little bit emotion laden, right? If we're going to be talking about funerals, then I will take you through the music that's played, right?
Okay.
I will take you through the different aspects of the funeral, the parts that are intentionally designed to provide catharsis, which might include wailing, right? Okay, which might include to, what would you actually imagine if you were the person who had to talk to a family and give them words of encouragement and hope after a police shooting, or after a person who looked just like you died, or a COVID death, or diabetes, or some of these things that afflict Black communities. What do you say to comfort that family so that they can, because they're not going to a therapist tomorrow,
Right.
they have to go back to work and live their lives amid these things that are continuing to happen. So why is that celebration piece important, and what does it look like? You will see at the workshop, and I can give you some things to check out that I've written as well. I have one thing called Second Line in That Death, and it's a ritual in New Orleans where that can happen at any time of the year, but where, as a quick little snapshot, where the body is actually taken and paraded around. Well, sometimes the body is not there, but often, and we saw this if you watched the George Floyd's funeral. I watched several of them.
Yeah.
His funeral I sat for almost 4 hours. So, and that's a traditional Black funeral, can take a while, just like the church service, because that is your one space for catharsis, and you expect it, and you have a big meal afterwards.
You've explained something to me, yes, very clearly, because I attended a last year in a Baptist church, and we were there for about 4 hours.
Yes.
And then right outside the actual sanctuary, there were all these tables, because now we're going to sit down and have a meal. And
Yes.
there were all the kids and the families, all ages, and it's an entire day where I feel like you're huddled together to support the family, because the woman who died left 5 children.
Yes.
And this is and everybody is there to take part and understand and talk about everyday things and how that is. And it is a very supportive system, because there's nothing else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there is that time of sitting there, right? That time of community where people will chip in and bring different things often, right? Yeah, it could be catered, but it matters that, this person who's good at making the red beans and rice, and then that person,
a lot of that, yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm talking about my New Orleans flavor. So that is where I'm from. I'm in Missouri, which is great, but I bring a lot of New Orleans traditions and rituals that really, I think the culture, the rituals around death and loss in New Orleans really, I think best encapsulate the rituals that we see that date back to African culture that have been held on to, and then how have they evolved across time, and how have younger people changed them a little bit while held on to some of them? How did they shift during the time that people were enslaved, and what did they still hold on to, right? So much strength within communities that deal with struggle. Well, a lot of different marginalized communities.
Community with struggle, that's the important thing, because one of the things I see is that if there's no component of support like church or rituals, it's like that person's going to be lost somehow. Yes. Won't even survive maybe 18, 17, they're gone.
Yes.
Because there's nothing there to keep holding the focus of, there's something greater, there's more honor, there's something sacred, and stick to that, because that'll take you through life and you'll be safer that way. Yeah, it's truly a lot of understanding about how soul loss as a group happens.
Yes.
And how
you're on the pulse. We could co-present this. You are right on the pulse. Thank you. And again, that do you see any consistencies between this and then a culture that you're a part of right now?
Well, the Latin American community basically comes in the sense that they were indigenous people. They were, you know, like they would say Indians, but I'm Central American, so coming in through the South, Central America, and Native Americans all the way up to Canada. These are people who existed with nature, and then all of a sudden there was conquest. And so basically the kings that existed in those times basically told their people, you're going to have to figure out a way to become part of those religions that are coming up so you can survive and continue practicing the rituals that we currently know in secret to keep your soul going so that you can continue and, you know, give birth, and we will still be alive as we go forward, I know 100 years from now, which is still part of the communities. I mean, there's a lot of church I know in my family in Central America, there's a lot of church. There's also been death connected to, just because of the way that society has evolved in Central and South America. And it doesn't matter if you have money or not, you're going to be touched by it.
Yes.
Yeah, you're going to be attacked in some way or kidnapped or whatever it is that happens, which are things that happen in my family. And then they're trying to migrate, and you know, they're thinking, I don't want to leave my home, but I'm going to die here. So there's definitely also soul loss there, and how they're still working on getting above it. So it takes a great deal of understanding when you see people from the outside, and maybe I'm also guilty of things, because I see people, I'm like, why are they doing that? But you really come to know, you have to really look at beyond what you're seeing.
Yes.
And that's basically what you're talking about.
Yes.
Don't judge it just on the face surface, because there's something deeper going on. And the few compassionate people, I'm assuming, will see that and possibly turn a lot of people's lives around, because they're not listening to what they're seeing on the outside. They're going, I see somebody else in there. Let me take you out of there. So that is it. This is very important work that you're doing. I wanted to know if a lot of the people that have taken the course with you at Missouri, and maybe were there a lot of people who were more from the white community, or it was a mixed group of people, and how did they take it back to work, that the techniques work on in their own life and help them?
Oh my goodness. So when I've done presentations nationally and internationally related to Black bereavement and Black families and populations, the audiences have always been diverse in terms of, and by diversity means many different populations. So young, older, Black, white, Latino, Native, I mean, men, women, so people from different anybody, you know, there is always something to unlearn and learn. In a safe space that where we do a little bit of just like self-checking in first, and where are we now, what do we know right now, and the goal is for everybody to leave with a shared understanding of some things. For sometimes it is you know, I've rarely ended without like a number of people who have described just a lot of aha moments, and how the explanation somehow made more sense to them in this case and in this space. And so again, I'm just extremely hopeful right now based on what I'm seeing, and visually at protests, and not just, I want to say also protest, that's just a form of grief. That's how some people work. There are other people who want to advance their understanding some people advance their understanding by donating to causes related to disenfranchised groups. Other people attend workshops like this. So it's like, what are your needs right now as you know, as we're talking today and having this conversation? Is this something that you want to be a part of? Because there's one more chance to advance an understanding, and that's still contributing to the betterment. That's still, even participation in this is work toward enfranchising groups. It's part of it's just understanding what's going on with people so that it makes sense to us. Yes. And when things make sense to us, we live a more free life. We live more freely. Like, so I studied death and loss and trauma, and you're talking about I'm going to funerals and I'm watching funerals, and not just this one. Like, this is what I do, right? And I show up at funeral, you know, just a day. I live a life of working with people dealing with trauma. I've had my own trauma. And so part of the goal is, so how am I still so happy? I look at oppression and discrimination and want to know how I stay balanced. Is one is a part of it is my spirituality, right? Which is a part of my, it's just culturally important, right? A relationship that's something with a higher being. Okay. What are all of the self-reflective practices that I engage in, meditation, but then also understanding things allows me to just feel free, because I'm not walking around with layers of misunderstanding. I feel like that's like carrying around a big, heavy backpack everywhere I go, right? So most of my days are spent, I'm able to smile as I do this work and function, and it's difficult, right?
Yeah.
But I'm able to walk through these doors and continue to do this work because I'm able to constantly be on the quest for knowledge and self-awareness when I go places, and better understanding even why people don't understand this helps me be a better teacher as I talk about it, so that people do understand it more clearly.
Well, I wanted to understand something also about the class, and that is, I feel like as if you're going to go through and carry people through some of these rituals, that they should actually be uplifting. I don't know if they're fun, but that they have a component that will make people feel more as a group. And could you describe a little bit of that? I don't know.
Yeah, sure. So everything about underrepresented group, many underrepresented groups, and we see this in majority cultures too, to some extent. So again, as whoever is participating, you will see some glimpses of your own life and lived experiences, and you'll see some that are vastly different, but difference is okay, right? Sorry, to answer your question.
Well, no, I wanted to, yes.
Community. I was going to say that one important thing about Black communities is that we're very communal, very collectivist. And the ritual, one of the rituals in New Orleans that I'm going to talk about is not only are people who know the deceased, not only are they invited, but random people down the street who also want to pay tribute are invited. And so for me, part of the reason why I try to help people understand this, but one of these particular rituals that's celebratory, is because it's intentionally designed for what is called the second line, the uninvited guests, right? the extra people who show up and say, I value this person, I value this topic, I value this community, I want to be a part of it, I want to learn. And that's my frame of reference throughout the entire process, is like, we want to learn, we all want to grow and do better and know more, so that we see the world in a different light. One time this guy once said, and this is, now when he looks up at the sky, and it wasn't a good analogy at the time, it was after I had been in a terrible accident and was hoping I would get better. And the guy said, when he looks up in the sky, he doesn't see stars, he sees constellations. He sees things far more complexly and beautifully now because of how long he has been studying this or exploring it and keeping his mind open. And that's kind of how I see this. You will see the stars, but you will see the constellations. You'll see the interconnections better between things that are going on, going back and forth between how this connects directly to you to how it's different, but getting it, right? So that's the main thing. And it's very communal. And I also don't want to, everybody wants to feel safe. Keep in mind, my whole idea is I study community building, I study alliance formation. Yes. So I'll be quite honest with you. Some things might be hard to, it's hard to see people in pain. So if you feel like that at certain points, then that's a normal human experience, right?
Right.
If you came to this workshop and you felt, oh God, that's too bad, then I don't know what to say. This workshop won't fix that, but it will help you see. I want you to know that it's normal to empathize. It will be normal. I'm upset and I study some of these things and they're just sad. It doesn't matter what group it was. But as we look at the context, and again, we talked a little bit about it today, life is not all awful for everybody. It's not just awful for Black people. I'm happy. Like, it's great to be Black. It's an honor to be African American. It's an honor to be white. It's an honor to be Latino. It's an honor to be all of these different things. But it's how we take our time to understand and educate ourselves about them. And that's what our journey would be together. It's a journey.
I feel like you basically are going to be offering something that will empower people in different ways.
Many different ways.
Yeah, because if you're teaching technique, and I assume you told me that you also wanted to send people a link for those that decide to come to the class so that they can get a little heads up of context you were talking about regarding rituals. So you just don't jump into something and then you understand it from a bigger perspective. So you can really become part of the class. It's not just a class. Basically, they should be coming into an experience.
Yes.
And you were telling me that basically when you do this in person, you bring bees and you bring all these things. And I didn't really quite understand what you were doing.
Okay. So I will, part of the, and we're going to watch a brief video related to it as well. Mm-hmm. And then we practice. That's kind of how it goes. There will be music. There will be conversation. There will be, again, there will be some information. This might be a tiny bit different. I think it honestly would be a disservice if I jumped immediately into a ritual with no understanding about why we're doing it.
Set up.
Especially right now. Again, this is a high time. If you have children at home, if you're watching the news, don't you want to understand better what's going on? and don't you better want to? So again, the ritual is kind of this behavioral. It's kind of the behavioral piece, and it's an emotional piece, and then there's like the cognitive piece to put together so they all make sense. So I will spend a little bit of time of again initially going back and forth between where we are when we start, because I don't know you yet, right? You're learning a little bit about me, and so I actually start there. I start with just kind of a chance to just think about what you already might be aware of, and then what you want to know more about. And then just a little bit of time about, so what is Black grief like? And then how are these rituals so important and what do they look like? Let's go through them together. And then the music makes more sense. And every step that I take you through will make more sense. So in terms of things that you will bring, I want you to bring your heart, your beautiful brain, your energy, your ability to be present. I would love to send a couple things if you wouldn't mind reading before, just to give you a little bit of background, a little bit more that you will see when I write, that I really write for diverse audiences. Even my book was designed so that, the most well-read person, or, the person with all of this, I don't know what I want to say, for everybody. So it was important to me that it be sold by Amazon and by Target.
Okay.
So basically, and that's how I approach this. So in terms of the things that you'll bring those basic tools. I would love to see your beautiful faces. And the other items I don't think will be that challenging to, I need one more moment. COVID has shifted things for me. So, and for everybody. And so we're not going to do this workshop like COVID didn't happen and didn't matter. And we're not going to do this workshop like people aren't protesting like right outside of the open center right now. So, and also it's a huge disservice. Like while we're in the same space together, we're going to unpack just a tiny bit of that in terms of context, because even funerals are different right now. And how are those different changes in rituals especially impacting communities where this was your one big space to get what you need to function. Right. So
we are going to be offering also CEUs. So anyone who's a professional, and that is also areas who you work with, a lot of professionals, who will take away tools that they can start using because they are working with what they call minority groups. And so they now have, I think, more empowerment to understand something a little bit than just walking in the door and saying, oh, just another patient.
Now, can I say one more thing? And this isn't just,
we're not finished.
Understanding. Part of this also is understanding ourselves too, right? I think I don't ever walk into a space where people don't leave. We're our most important, like, we're number one, right? We have to understand ourselves. So we do the other piece, but again, some of this is going to be about what do I understand right now about myself? What do I understand about these rituals? And how can I pull all of this together so that this makes more sense to me? Oftentimes people come because they just want to learn about this other thing, but as part of it is like, how am I in relation to this, right? How are my rituals connected to these? So there's a lot of Black culture is about interconnectedness, and it's about community, and so that's my approach. And so
Okay.
again, if you're not working, and oftentimes sometimes people say, well, there's diversity in white populations, there's diversity in Black populations, like there's so it's not just, so if you don't work with a Black population, that's fine too. Maybe you want to do more outreach. And sometimes people come to me because they want to work more closely with Black population. So they're trying to bridge the gap. And sometimes you don't, but you just simply want to better understand the news, or
That's
you
great.
just want to better, be a better ally for a friend, or for the child who's being disregarded at the counter at the store in like Target. Okay. So it's for knowledge sake. If we want to do better and have more alliance building, this is your space, and a chance to capitalize on that, all in this workshop. So
that sounds fantastic. I want to remind everyone that the name of the workshop is Grief, Survival, and Healing Rituals in the African American Culture. And it is 2 afternoons that it will be held on a Sunday and a Monday, June the 28th, June the 29th, from 1 to 4 on each day. Again, there'll be some notes added to the to what we have on our current on the website. So we're going to update some of that soon, and also put in CEUs for those that require it. So thank you so much for this.
Thank you all for hanging out and listening today, and thank you for your work.
Thank you.
You're incredible.
So are you.